RRTPO TAC. And I hope everybody had a great holiday break and is refreshed and energized for 2024. There are a couple items on the agenda that I expect are going to generate quite a bit of conversation. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started so we can leave as much time as necessary for those two items. So, Janice, if you don't mind calling the roll, please.
Sure. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos. Here. Miss Ragland. Charles City County, Mr. Mitchell. Miss Russell. Chesterfield County, Miss Smith.
Here.
Miss Walker.
Here.
Goochland County, Mr. Goyne.
Here.
Mr. Coleman. Hanover County, Chair Vidunez.
Here.
Mr. Hardman. Henrico County, Miss Smidler.
Here.
Mr. Yor. New Kent County, Miss Inman.
Here.
Leduc. Powhatan County, Mr. Ciriello. Mr. Shardine. City of Richmond, Miss Clark.
Good morning. Here.
Morning. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Mr. Wagner. GRTC, Ms. Robinson. We have Ms. Robinson. I'll mark her as present. She may be having trouble with her. She needs to be moved over. Mr. Robinson. Plan RBA, Mr. Bushing.
Here.
Mr. Ariel. RMTA, Ms. Simmons. VDOT, Ms. Rhodes.
Here, good morning.
Good morning. Ms. Mueller. Ride Finders, Mr. O'Keefe.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Does anybody have any amendments to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the next item, which would be approval of the November 14th TAC meeting minutes. Does anybody have any changes, additions, amendments to the minutes?
This is Nora. I move approval of the minutes.
Second, Barb.
Okay, this is a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Are there any opposed or abstains?
Joe, I'll abstain since I was absent.
Okay. All right, the minutes are approved. Next item is public comment period. If any members of the public are present and they wish to comment, please state your name. Okay, seeing none. And do we receive any written comments?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Moving right along, chairman's report. I don't have anything to report at this time. So that leads us into the heart of the agenda. Item 7, I'm going to turn it over to Miles.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me pull up the presentation. First item we have today is Smart Scale, round 6. So this is one of the two items that we expect to have a lengthy discussion. We've put 30 minutes on the agenda for this. So just to walk through presentation. As you all know, Smart Scale is the principal funding program for transportation improvements in the Commonwealth. The projects that we were selecting from were generally drawn from the Long Range Transportation Plan, Connect RVA 2045. The Planning District Commission and the MPO are both eligible applicants for this process. the TAC recommendations from today will inform both of the boards. So just like last year, the plan is for the policy board to then make a recommendation to Plan RVA for their application, so that we can ensure consistency for planning across the region. As we've discussed in depth in the previous meetings, there have been a lot of changes from the CTB actions on Smart Scale. So this is the new scoring typologies for our two portions of the region. So we're type B and type D. The expectation with the expanded MPO boundaries is type D is just going to go away. But we haven't received the updated technical guide yet to know if that's going to happen for sure. But type B, you see the big push was to add additional points to congestion, a little bit of benefit to accessibility, safety on type D. The other major change that's impacting the decisions that we're looking at today is the high priority projects eligibility. So as a regional entity, we don't compete in the district grant program. We just compete for high priority projects. So we're now reduced in the types of projects we can submit. Previously, it was anything that met a regional network need or corridor of statewide significance need. Now it has to meet those needs, and it has to come from these types of projects. So it's really limited to new capacity projects, interchange improvements, and then transit and freight are really focused on rail and fixed guideway. So pretty narrow in terms of the types of services that GRTC provides. And then other improvements that came out of STARS, pipeline, AMP studies, or MPO studies that are regionally significant. So it's that's kind of the catch-all for most of the study type projects that we've submitted. But again, this is a more limited subset than what we've been able to submit previously. So for the update, at the last meeting, we hadn't received all of the requests for potential candidates. At the end, we received ultimately 26 requests to be considered for the process. As we discussed, the staff review was really trying to focus on readiness and eligibility and consistency with our regional planning. So first thing we looked at was LRTP consistency. Is the project already included in our constrained long-range plan? Or is it local and something that could be considered? Or is it a project that would be consistent and would have to be added to the constrained long-range plan? So those are kind of the three things we looked at. High priority project eligibility, we looked at that list. VTrans needs, we were looking at the 2021 midterm needs, trying to see if there was an easily identifiable need that this project would meet. The readiness requirements, that was a focus on the additional documentation that would be required. Based on all of the CTB discussion and our discussion with VDOT and OIP staff, our understanding is that the readiness requirements are going to be more strictly enforced. So the idea is that we need to have all the documentation and our ducks in a row before we get to the pre-apps and ultimately the full application. And then the last two things we looked at were more focused on the region and regional funding. So do we have any potential leverage or leverage that's already committed to the project? And then geographic distribution. Are we focusing on just the core, or are we also including the rural portions of the region as well in our project selection? So it was a pretty comprehensive look at it. There's a summary in your agenda package, which covers our review. We tried to just pull out the key pieces that you needed for that, to fit it all on one page. And ultimately, we came up with a list of recommendations. This is intended to be a starting point. We are more than happy to change this through this discussion. It's really just we wanted to give you something to react to as the starting. So to develop the TPO side, what we focused on was projects that were already in the constrained long-range plan. So we didn't have to take any action on the CLRP. And then projects that we didn't think had significant readiness concerns and we could find an easily met need. So the project recommendations are Route 1 widening in Ashland, the I-95-54 interchange in Ashland and Hanover, I-95 Route 10 in Chesterfield, Huguenot Road congestion and safety improvement in Chesterfield, Route 360 widening in Chesterfield, 288 southbound auxiliary lanes in Goochland and Powhatan. There's two projects there. The two Gaskins Road interchange projects in Henrico, I-64 Route 106 interchange improvement in New Kent, Walmsley Boulevard Bridge extension in the city of Richmond, which came out of the Commerce Corridor Study, and Belt Boulevard BRT streetscape, which would be a component of the new north-south BRT alignment. So those are the projects we recommended on the TPO side. Again, the focus was on projects that were already in our constrained plan. And we felt there were limited readiness concerns. The two projects that have asterisks next to them are ones where the IAR is underway and not yet ready. So that's where there's a little bit of readiness concerns. So we wanted to make sure those were flagged. For the Plan RVA side, what we did was we looked at the projects that were either not fully in the constrained plan, but didn't have readiness concerns. So a lot of these were ones that have either previously been submitted or ones that the IAR is already underway, being completed, but they may not be fully contained in the long-range plan for the region. So the thought was these would make more natural Plan RVA projects, as they would not be coming necessarily strictly from the MPO's list of planning projects. What this requires is that the MPO endorse these projects to move forward, just like we do with all the locality submissions. And then, so those, it's Busy Street Extension in Chesterfield. So this is from a STAR study on Route 60, 288, 360. This is a TPO funded IAR, and the county's funding a portion of it as well. But this is a recommendation of the 360, 288 study. Route 5, New Osborne Turnpike. So this is Henrico, Richmond recommended, both jurisdictions recommended this project for this round. 360 and I-64 interchange, that is also recommended by both, and that came out of the pipeline and was a previous submittal. And then Powhatan County, Route 60, US 522 intersection improvement, that came out of the Route 60 study. So those are the 5 recommended on Plan RVA. We also have other options, and we've included them in your agenda as well for the discussion. Most of these have concerns as far as readiness or meeting an eligible high priority need, which is why we pulled them out. So the first 2, Route 60, Village of Midlothian, and the Fall Line Trail, they're primarily bicycle and pedestrian projects. There's access management, but that's not a capacity type improvement that looks like it would be eligible. There's 2 Courthouse Road projects from Chesterfield that are coming out of a STAR study that we just didn't have enough information to make a determination one way or another. But I think those would potentially be eligible based on the study category. Route 33 widening in Hanover, when we reviewed the VTrans needs, we couldn't see anything that was a capacity related need, congestion, reliability, those. It was mostly safety needs. So our thought was that would be a better local application to be able to use safety as a category. Bridge replacement, only new bridges are eligible. So we pulled that out. And this project, I believe, is on its way. So I don't think we need to worry about that one. Short pump improvements. This is the one that we've had the most discussions on, and I think could potentially be included. The concern that we had is the IAR approval for short pump is conditional, and some of those conditions are figuring out the phasing and getting through the NEPA process. So it's really figuring out which elements need to be included in this project. How do we make this complete and make sure we don't get screened out because it's not meeting all the conditions of the IAR at the same time? So basically trying to line up that IAR approval with the slate of projects that's in the short pump improvement. So that I think we can have more discussion on, and I think VDOT's prepared to provide a little more guidance on that as well. And then the last 2, Jude's Ferry widening and Red Lane Road realignment in Powhatan, both are in UDAs and would probably score better going through the district grant program and then moving into high priority if still eligible. But we couldn't find a high priority need that would be met. So that is the overview. So the requested action today and what we want to get to with this discussion, we have 17 slots between Plan RVA and the TPO. So the TAC needs to recommend 12 projects to RRTPO for our MPO pre-applications. And then an additional 5 projects should be submitted to the policy board for Plan RVA's consideration. So if the policy board agrees, they can recommend those to the Planning District Commission as 5 projects for consideration as well. So that's a very brief overview of everything. I'm happy to answer any questions, but otherwise we intended this to be a discussion for you guys to come up with the final list.
Okay, so Miles, that was a great overview. and description of the projects. What I might suggest, and maybe this discussion is not going to be as long as we thought it might be, is if you could pull up the list of the projects that were not being recommended. And I would ask the committee to, are there any projects listed here that are not being recommended that anybody has any strong objections to? And okay, I don't know whose hand went up first, but I see Austin and Sharon. So let's go with Sharon first, please.
Excuse my voice, I'm losing my voice, but strong concern about short pump improvements not being included. We have a conditional IAR approved. We're starting NEPA. This is like one of the, it really is a regional improvement. This includes I-64 and West Broad Street, improving that interchange. There's a lot of rear end collisions on 64, many rear end collisions on Broad Street, the highest crash location. So also include a new North Gate interchange at 64. We have a conditional IAR. I'm willing to undergo additional VDOT pre-screening, but I feel this is ahead of other interchange projects as far as NEPA. And I really feel strongly that this should be one of the TPO applications.
Okay, so
and
let's
if we need to drop another application to do that, whether it's one of Henrico's or another, I'd like to open that for discussion.
Yeah, so let's hold that thought. Okay, as one project that we definitely want to have some more conversation about. And I think one of the questions that I would ask is in terms of, I don't know how many applications Henrico gets, but in terms of your smart scale applications, would that, where does that fit in terms of the ones that the Henrico would submit? But just before you respond to that, let's hear from Austin. And again, my question really is, are there other projects on this list, aside from short pump, that we think deserve more consideration? Go ahead, Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, the Goochland 288 projects, can we flip to the screen that has the recommended projects real quick, please? Yeah, there we go. Oh, there we go. So yeah, the two projects that involve Goochland County, we're actually planning on submitting those as part of Goochland County's application slots, which is why we didn't actually directly reach out to you guys to ask that the TPO take on those projects in order to kind of, promote regionalism. We figured it doesn't make a lot of sense for the projects to be taking up two slots with us kind of already moving them forward, and it does then make them eligible for the DGP rather than just the high priority project list. And then Goochland County will second kind of what Henrico wants is the shore pump interchange, just the benefit that our county will see with that suite of projects. I know there may be some more discussion on that in a minute, but just wanted to go ahead and echo those sentiments now.
Okay, so thank you. So we can take 288, the two 288 projects off the list, which now opens up two slots, one potentially for short pump, but let's hold off. I think that's you make I'm glad you brought that up, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Are there other projects that localities that are recommended either for the TPO or Plan RVA? Are there other projects listed that the localities are planning to submit for? Are there other projects that we can take off the recommended list, I guess is what I'm asking.
Okay, this is
Amy.
Amy. Yeah, hi. Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. Yeah, I think I'd like to hear a little bit more. I think you mentioned that Sarah might be giving sort of an overview of the importance of the IAR. I thought that's what I heard you say. And I think, we're probably in a position where we're going to go ahead and submit our project, ourselves. And we are moving it forward. We are advancing with the DDI alternative, formalizing that and getting the IAR ready to submit for final review and then signature. I think it would be helpful to hear from Sarah about the timing, and when do they recommend having the IAR completely, finalized? Is that by the application period in August? And at what level of advancement do they need to see in the pre-screening? Those would be questions that we would like, when suitable.
Sarah,
Yeah, I'm happy
Yeah.
to jump in, Joe.
okay, please.
So I am currently working on readiness guidance, and I will get that out to Miles to distribute to you all to help clarify. Readiness hasn't really changed, but it is more upfront in the process this year. To your question, Amy, specifically for interchange related projects, in the pre-application, oh gosh, I'm blanking on what the term is. A framework document. Liz is tutoring me on these documentation language pieces, so please bear with me. A framework document will be required in the pre-application. And as a part of the completion of the pre-application, the applicant will need to commit that the official document or IAR, which is required for interchanges and for most of the interchange improvement pieces, something like the New Ken interchange does require an IAR, Amy, just for if we're keeping with the example.
Yeah.
There would be a readiness gate that would occur just before the completion of pre-app, where the applicant would need to say, we can confirm that this readiness requirement will be met by this date. And that date is just prior to the submission deadline, which all of you know the submission deadline is August 1st of 2024. And so that would be just how the confirmation piece would be. So once you go through the full app process, the final IAR or the draft IAR, which has the necessary VDOT support, will be in the application. Some weeks the timing is still under debate, but some weeks prior to submission deadline, and then VDOT will complete a readiness review of, yes, this document is in fact meets readiness requirements.
Okay.
So that's in fact the timing of things to go through the process.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Sarah.
And while I'm here, there's some options with regard to developing your pre-applications. The three things I'd like you all to think about are VTrans, HPP eligibility, and readiness. And I will provide supporting documentation and guidance for those things this week so that you all can begin that process. Sharon alluded to this, so I'll speak up to it. We also have the pre-scoping module available. You all are more than welcome, at your discretion to input the applications you think are moving forward through your smart scale process to determine if they potentially have any specifically readiness or eligibility concerns. It'll give you maybe some reassurance as you move forward in developing your pre-applications. So I'd like to put that out there for all of you to consider as we do this. Miles has done a great job with this list of identifying potential readiness concerns, and this looks fantastic, but since I had the floor for a second, I wanted to try and say all that.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. I need to confer with Nora on this, but listening to the discussion and the point about the TPO only being eligible to submit for high priority projects and not for district grant funding, it would probably be to our advantage, Nora, to submit jointly the I-95-54 project with one of our applications rather than as a TPO application. And I'm not, you don't need to answer, but that's what I'm thinking at the moment.
I don't mind answering. And if we keep so I was thinking if there were enough projects that people really wanted, I could probably pull Route 1 off. But if we keep Route 1 on there, then I could use one of my projects for 95.
But I can tell you Hanover is not going to be able to submit all of its available applications.
Oh, okay.
We don't have that many projects that qualify.
Sounds good.
So it looks like we're in a really good spot in terms of at least 3 and probably 4 projects coming off this list. I think we could have a really short discussion regarding the addition of short pump into one of those slots. And then it still leaves 3 available slots. So again, going back to those that got that weren't selected, are there others that and I keep in mind that these applications, as you all know, are very time consuming and tedious. And so I don't think that we should just necessarily submit 12 just because we have 12 slots. If we're pretty confident that for whatever reason, a project's going to be screened out, it's just not worth the effort. These things are highly competitive to begin with. So if we don't have a good application, like 33 widening in Hanover is not a good application based upon the readiness and maybe other. So, I would not suggest that project be moved into one of the available slots just to fill a slot. So with that said, and I see Austin has his hand raised, are there others that we should consider moving forward, assuming that we'd have consensus on moving the short pump project into one of the 4 available? Go ahead, Austin.
Hey, I was actually just going to ask if there was a representative from Powhatan on, because it looks like one of the Plan RVA projects is a Route 6522 improvement, which is the terminus of one of our major arterials running through the county. And I just hadn't seen or been aware of any improvements at that terminus that a lot of our citizens drive through. So I was more curious than anything as to what that project entails.
Thank you.
You want to go to the next page, Miles, just so we can see that project? Yes. Which one is that?
It's the
Austin?
one on the bottom, and it doesn't sound like I'm looking at the attendant list. It doesn't look like there's anybody from Powhatan on. I'll reach out to them directly just because I haven't seen that improvement yet. And like I said, it's at the terminus of one of our major arterials in Goochland, which is 522. So I'll reach out.
So do you have some concern that maybe it doesn't meet some type of eligibility?
No, it's not that. It's just a project that Goochland didn't know
Okay.
existed, or, just not aware of what the project is.
Understood. Okay. Miles, once again, back to those that were screened out. Do we see any others on this list that we would want to recommend to be submitted either through the TPO or Plan RVA potentially, aside from the short pump project? Okay, so hearing none, it sounds like we have our recommended list for both the TPO and Plan RVA. I guess going once, going twice. Do we need to, Nora?
Yeah, Joe, sorry, I was trying to push all the buttons. So Miles says I have 4 applications, so I could do Route 1 as one of mine. If I don't know which is better, if it's better for staff, I would just work with VDOT to do my Route 1 project.
Yeah, just keep in mind, if you do that, you are taking yourself out of the district grant pool if you have the TPO submit that.
Okay. I mean, I'm happy to leave it in. I would very much like to leave it in, but I don't want to feel guilty because I have an extra spot I could fill.
So what is your preference?
My preference is to leave it in.
To have the TPO submit that?
Yes.
Okay, so I think this requires
So I just had a quick question.
I'm sorry, Amy. Go
That's
ahead.
okay. That's okay, thank you. Do we know how big the pot of the district grant funding is? I mean, you know, if you have a project that's really just not going to compete in the district, then that would make sense for the TPO to, you know, to maybe leverage their spot for the high priority. But if it's, you know, if a project could score any, you know, and be eligible for either pot, I guess that would be another question to ask from that perspective.
Yeah, I don't know what the pot is. It
What
changes
is-
from cycle to cycle, but has it, I think it's averaged around, I could be wrong, somewhere around 80 million.
Yeah, Joe, you're spot on there.
Okay.
The last cycle, round 5, was the most DGP that Richmond District has had at 127 million. The least the district has had has 56 million. So it'll be somewhere in there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay,
Excuse me. So I
Yeah.
think we'll go ahead and take ours off, and New Kent will just take responsibility for advancing that.
okay.
Thank you.
So we're taking off, back to the list, Miles, please. So we're taking off the two Route 288 projects. We're taking off the I-64 106 project in New Kent. And we're also taking off the I-95 54 interchange project in Ashland and Hanover. And we are recommending adding the short pump project to the recommended TPO list. And I think that's all of the changes. Is everybody comfortable with that?
How many does that, this is Sharon, how many does that leave us with? If we take off, sorry, I should have done the math, but I want to make sure we submit at least 10 pre-apps.
We'd be at 9, so we're short one.
Could we move one from Plan RBA over? Just because, like, I think with the TPO, we're allowed 12 pre-apps. And then with the final applications, we get 10. And with Plan RVA, I guess we're allowed 5 pre-apps. I can't remember if we get 3 final apps for Plan RVA, but if that helps increase our odds, I would like to move one from Plan RVA so we at least have 10 submitted by the TPO, our limit.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for making that point. Do we have, does it really matter which project it is?
Joe, this is Diana. Just in line with Henrico, I think it looks like now we have 2 spots that could come off of this list. So I would definitely defer to Henrico on which of the 2 we want to move over, if it's at this, group's will.
I mean, there was a pipeline study completed by VDOT for 360 and I-64. And I know I don't mean to put it back on Miles, but I want to make sure. I know he kind of had like a line where what was in the not vision list or the LRTP or the conditional LRTP. I just want to be as consistent as we can.
Yeah, so I think the easiest one would be the Powhatan project to move over, because that is consistent. The other 4 are either local in character or partially consistent. So, the 288 project, we have the CD, but we don't have the Genito ramp as part of the constrained plan currently. So that's kind of the dividing line on these. So I think the Route 60 would be the most consistent to move over. And we do get 4 slots, and Sarah, please jump in if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 4 slots for Plan RVA. So I think if we left 4 here and had 10 on the other, then we've hit all of our caps. We just don't have any extras for screening out.
Spot on, Miles.
Sharon, are you okay with if we move 6522 over?
Mr. Chair, I am. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Dirona. Okay, yes. Sharon, are you good with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So I think we have it. I'm not going to say it again. I think everybody understands what we're doing here. Do we need to have some type of vote on this?
Yes, we need a vote to recommend it to the policy board.
Roll call vote would probably be in order.
Okay, let's see. Ms. Amos? Oh, I'm sorry,
No, I don't think we have a,
we need a motion in a second. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I move approval of the list as amended.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, Amy seconded. Thank you.
Ms. Amos?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Going?
Aye.
Chair Vadunez?
Aye.
Ms. Smidler?
Aye.
Ms. Inman?
Aye.
Ms. Clark?
Aye.
Ms. Robinson?
Aye.
Ms. Dubinsky?
Aye.
Mr. Bushing?
Aye.
Ms. Rhodes?
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Excellent. That went much better than I expected. So thank you, everybody, for that. Great regional cooperation taking place. Okay, Miles, next item, please.
Sure, thank you again. So this next item is the annual safety target. We discussed this one at the last meeting as well. So just the background again, we're required to set targets for fatalities, serious injuries, and rates for each of those each year. So the Commonwealth sets targets, and then within 180 days after the state setting the target, the MPO also has to set a target. And essentially, we can either adopt the same target as the state, saying that we're going to follow along, or we can set a different target and try and match our programming practices to meet those goals. Our deadline for setting a target for this year is February 29th, which means we need to make a recommendation today so the policy board can take action next month. Last meeting, we discussed the various approaches to target setting that are allowed, and TAC's consensus was to look at a hybrid approach where we look at the trend line, but basically say level or improved performance is the only allowable target. So again, we're setting targets for 5 different performance measures. So it's the total number of fatalities, the fatality rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled, the serious injuries, serious injury rate, and then non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So these calculations are based on 5-year averages, and then it's a rate that requires us to also project VMT out to a future year. So with the hybrid approach, we, as I mentioned, took a look at the data from what VDOT had provided us, and then also the goals, which is obviously towards 0 death and serious injuries. And then we developed a target that would be consistent with that approach. So this is sort of the baseline of where we started. So this is what VDOT or what was provided originally. So this is basically the modeling that goes into setting the targets. As we talked about last time, there's a lot of data that goes into that modeling, but basically it provides a projection for 4 years on where we're going to be for fatalities, serious injuries, vulnerable road users, and then also VMT. And so the original data provided is basically, here's where the modeling says we are, here's where we are today. So this is the percentage change annually that we would need to get to where the target, where the modeling is suggesting we're going to be. Fatalities and vulnerable road user fatalities and injuries were going up. And so obviously with a hybrid approach, that's not acceptable. So we set those at 0, but otherwise where things were trending downward on serious injuries, we followed along with where the state's modeling had already suggested. VMT is the other piece of consideration here. To be able to set the rate, we have to project the VMT. The modeling suggested a decline in VMT. So we kept that through, but that may be something that the TAC wishes to discuss a little bit more in depth. So what does that actually look like? So this is the fatalities. Basically, each point is the annual fatalities, and then the line is the 5-year rolling average. So the current year, the 2021, which was the last year available, was at 107. So we set the target at 107 for 2024. In terms of the rate, what this does is actually a very slight increase. So from 1.049 to 1.05, and that's because of the declining VMT. So the red line is showing the VMT over time. The blue line is showing the fatality rate over time. So because we're setting a declining VMT, our rate is slightly increasing by setting a level target. Serious injuries, the projection was a continued decline, so we just followed with the current state projection rate on that. So from 880 in 2022 to 872 in 2024. Serious injury rate also declined slightly from 8.571 to 8.543, again with the declining VMT. And then non-motorized, we held even at 110. And you can see for the past 15 years, it's kind of been more or less level across the region. So it's that's a pretty consistent measure as well. So those are the proposed targets. In your agenda in the staff report, you have the actual breakdown of here's the percentage changes that get us to each of those, just like we discussed. The other item that was requested last time was for staff to come back with potential safety policies or actions for consideration. And we're not asking for any action on these today, but these were items that we wanted to bring up as potentials for future meeting topics, for just additional discussion. So some of the things that we can do, because the request was really what can we do to impact this? And some of the ideas that staff is bringing is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. We've had our 3 largest member localities have pursued grants for planning studies through that. We have the opportunity to do a regional where we fold in those localities into a broader regional plan. We have a regional plan currently, but it doesn't meet the requirements for the Safe Streets for All grants, so we can't actually pursue funding. So this would be one option, would be for us as a region to consider a regional scale safety plan, which would then open up the ability for all of us to pursue funding for those safety projects. Revisiting our Vision Zero work group and regional safety coordination efforts. This is something that the TAC may wish to consider, and that would basically be the opportunity for us to dive more deeply into safety beyond what we have time to do in just TAC meetings or policy board meetings. What that would look like, I think, is something we'd have to decide, but that's another option that we wanted to bring up. And then the last thing is really our complete streets and our towards zero death strategies and policies. At the regional level, we don't really have much in place. So that is something that as we update the LRTP, which will be kicking off this year, or as we just want to look at it independently, we have the opportunity to set some policies on that side as well. It could be things like tying funding to completing complete streets requirements, or at least completing a checklist and that sort of thing. I mean, there's various options we have, and I think those are things that we could discuss and decide what's the best approach. But these are different ideas that we had for potential safety policy or action that if the TAC was interested in pursuing any or all of these, we can have additional discussion down the road. But this was a request, so we did want to bring this back to you as well. The formal action for today is to recommend targets for the 5 performance measures to the policy board. Again, those numbers are in your agenda packet, and I can also pull them back up if needed.
All right. Is that?
Yes, I'm open to any questions at this point.
Okay. All right. Anybody have any questions for Miles? First off, Barb.
I really like the idea of having a regional Safe Streets for All plan. And as we've been working on ours here in Chesterfield, I think a great piece to focus on regionally would be the education part of it. As you guys have done, Plan RVA has done with the anti-litter campaign. If the TPO and Plan RVA is able to do some region-wide targeted education campaigns, for trying to get people to reduce speeds, drive the speed limit, seatbelt usage, distracted driving, all that kind of stuff. I think that would really be a valuable piece in trying to improve our safety, our trying to reach our targets, I guess is how I want to say that.
I agree, Barb. Adding to that list would be, in my opinion, would be some outreach education about safe way to walk and run and bike, because I see a lot of things in my neighborhood that just aren't safe practices. Okay, and I'm sure I'm guilty at times of that as well. But yes, I think education is would be a great way to hopefully influence these numbers in the right direction. Yes, Ms. Robinson.
I just wanted to chime in my support as well. I can kind of see this being almost like a series event, how to walk in and bike safely, how to wait for a bus and cross the street safely, how to drive slow or reduce speed. So yeah, I think the regional effort there would be really beneficial.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Deanna, yes?
Yeah, I really appreciate Miles' effort on this as well as the previous item. And I would move that the TAC, I make a motion that TAC recommends the targets for the 5 performance measures to the policy board.
Thank you for that motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Barb.
Or a second. Is there any further discussion on this item? Okay, let's try a voice vote on this one. That's acceptable. Okay, so all those in favor of recommending the 5 performance measures to the policy board as stated, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Okay. There we go. Thank you. And I guess keep it going, Miles, with our next item to discuss our existing project funding request.
Good. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So this item is flexible regional funding, which is our new name for RSTP CMAC carbon reduction. Since we're starting to add more programs, we just one name for it all, flexible regional funding. So these are the existing projects that have requested additional funds for this round. So what I wanted to do, staff has provided a very short report and then the overview of all the projects. And from the past few rounds, really the discussion here at TAC has been where we've decided which projects need funding and when. So we've decided to continue with that approach and just walk through each project and then discuss how we're going to prioritize. So the first project we have on here is Route 1 improvements in the town of Ashland. This is one that's come back a couple times for additional funding over the past few years. This is almost 100% TPO funded. The town doesn't have the CVTA or other local funds to be able to cover the project, which is why it's come back. And this is one where the project is scheduled to start construction soon. And when it was submitted back in the fall, it was a February timeline. I don't know if that's slipped since then, but that's what we're working on. This is moving towards construction soon. A $2.3 million deficit, and so that's been requested from the MPO. As you can see, the primary causes on this one were the right-of-way duration and unit costs, so just general inflation, and then the management reserve has increased as well. So I'm just going to run through each of them, and then we can discuss them more in depth, but I just wanted to make sure everyone has the list. The second one that we have is in Chesterfield. So this is the Route 60 shared use path. So the chart looks a little confusing. Basically, there were 2 projects. They were next to each other. They got merged into one project. So this project hasn't seen any cost increases historically. The request right now is just a 4% cost increase. So this is one where TAC would be able to make the final recommendation. And this project is in right-of-way. Construction scheduled for fiscal 26. And really this is PROAG requirements, since this is a bike ped project. Those have had impacts, and then contingencies and unit cost updates. So small request on this project. The next one is also bike ped in Chesterfield. This is Meadowdale. This project is also 100% TPO funded, construction in 26, 10% cost increase, and it's just over the threshold for the TPO. So this one has to go to the TPO for approval. Again, this is inflation, market changes have increased, and then the in-plan utilities, stormwater costs have had an impact on the cost estimate.
Miles,
The next one we have.
Miles, can we pause 1 second? I do see Barb has her. I know you wanted to go through these, but maybe she has something to add.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't want to get too far away from it. The Route 60 bike ped project. Yeah, that one we're trying to go to construction in 24.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I put that in the application incorrectly or what.
Yeah,
But yeah, I was checking. That's why it took me a while to catch up.
okay. Yeah, so and if it was me, I apologize, but we will note that. The next one we have is Pole Green widening, which is in right of way, and this has had an increase. So this is unit labor costs alignment changes, which impact right of way acquisition and design changes. This one still has a little bit of time before we're getting to construction, so we may have some time to resolve this one. The request is just under 1.3 million. The next one is Atlee Station widening, and this one is starting right of way next fiscal year. So with a change in phase, we do need to make sure that the funding's in place, whether it's TPO or local. The unit labor costs, alignment changes, and then we did want to highlight this. So we had some discussion last year about what constitutes a scope change. So this is a very minor change. It's a roundabout feature at an intersection that was already included in the project. So the way staff is viewing this is just a design change that's part of the existing scope. This is minor, doesn't constitute a scope change, but we did want to bring this up to TAC because the discussion last year was essentially what is a scope change, what counts, what doesn't count, and we didn't have a defined policy. The way we've been interpreting it is essentially the same thing as like what would trigger a TIP amendment. You know, you're changing the termini in a significant way. This is going from 4 lanes to 6 lanes, that sort of thing. But if TAC feels otherwise, we did want to make sure this was flagged so that could be open for discussion. But again, this request is just over $1 million, and this one could be resolved at the TAC level. The next two are two of our remaining legacy projects that are getting ready to start construction. So the first is 3 Chopped Road, which would be starting construction in the next fiscal year. So we want to make sure the funding's in place. This project has seen significant cost increase, and the request at this point is for the TPO to cover a quarter of that overall cost increase. So this is basically bringing us up just under 8.3 million, but it would be a quarter of the overall cost increase. So the county would be finding other sources for the balance. The second one is Sadler Road, which is our other legacy, also seen a large cost increase. On this one, the county is asking for 5.8 million, which would be half of the total cost increase. And this one is actually starting construction in a few months. So the ask would be to help offset those construction costs as we're getting started right now. And again, the primary driver has been delays with right-of-ways and utilities and inflation. On both of these, obviously, with the large increases, we'd have to go through the policy board for approval. The next one is one that we saw last year as well, Deepwater Terminal. This is a $1.3 million request. Unit costs and right-of-way and utility costs have increased. So the ask would be for the TPO to increase its share, and we would be covering essentially the cost increase on this one. So this is starting construction in July of 25, so technically not next fiscal year, but right at the end where we would probably want to get things lined up sooner rather than later. And then the last one on the list is Hull Street Phase 3. This one has also just started, but the updated estimate from the consultant team showed a large deficit, $5.3 million. So the city's trying to be proactive and request that earlier on, since this is a fully funded TPO, fully TPO funded project. Their start was to ask at the TPO. Really, this is inflation, relocation costs, unit cost. It's kind of just the general trend that's being reflected in this, since this was a pre-COVID estimate that we started with. So that's all of the projects. And what I try to do to help the process based on what we've been doing in the last few rounds was to organize it by which ones are starting construction in this next year, which ones are starting right away, and then which ones would be starting in the following fiscal year, where we might want to take care of it earlier rather than later. And it sounds like we need to add Route 60 to move it from the 26 list to the 24 to 25 list. But that's the kind of combined overview of here's the asks, here's where they are in project development. That way we can try and prioritize based on which projects need money when. So the requested action today, and I'm happy to go back to the other slides as we get into the discussion, is to provide a recommendation on each of these projects on how much additional funding, if any, should be awarded. And then those would be incorporated into the draft allocations plan. So when we bring back the new projects and a draft allocations program for you, that would already be included in that program. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Miles, Amy, I see your hand up, but 1 second. Miles, can you go back to the previous slide? So I don't see Pole Green Road, the Hanover Pole Green widening project on this.
So I didn't include all of them on here. I was only trying to include ones where, based on the schedule that was submitted, we had a new phase starting where there would be a review that would potentially hold the project up. So that's based on the last couple of years and what we've done as the TAC level, where the review has basically said if the project's not going into construction or not starting a new phase, we haven't been awarding funding in that year. So that was kind of the approach. I'm happy to pull those other ones up and we can look at the schedules as needed as well, though.
So what you're suggesting here, if I can just, is that potentially without the additional funding, these projects may not advance to this next phase?
Correct. So these are projects where if you're moving from, right away into construction, at that point, we have to reanalyze, make sure that the project is fully funded, and the money would be available to authorize construction. So these have deficits for construction and are getting ready to start construction. Then the next projects that, these are moving into right away in the next year, but they might not have all the funding they need for right away. So the request should help offset that. So that was the intent, was trying to prioritize by what needs money right now compared to what needs money potentially in another year or two.
So let me just make one more statement, and just kind of full transparency and disclosure about at least the two Hanover projects that we submitted requests for, is that as a backstop, we have these projects will advance there, that we will use local CBTA monies or other dollars to fully fund these. And so our intent was to offset some of that burden, and which is the reasons for the request. So, neither of the two projects, Atlee Station or Pole Green, would be delayed as advancing to that next phase. Okay, so, technically speaking, I'm not concerned about getting to the right-of-way phase, but in terms of the shortfall, but we are asking for up to 10% to again offset those dollars, those local dollars that would be used to cover whatever the deficits turn out to be. Okay, so Amy, you had your hand up.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Miles, this is just existing projects. So any applications for new projects, we haven't seen that yet, correct? I'm just verifying.
Correct.
Okay, so what does this do to the overall pot of money for allocation of new projects that need to be funded? And I mean, I think there is some concern when I see 1,000% increase in cost, and that's being 74% funded by the TPO. When do we start to say that's the locality's responsibility to fund that in some other manner. I understand they're gonna offset it, but 1,000% increase in a cost in a project is astronomical. And I know we went through this some time ago over the past year to try to reconcile all of these legacy projects. But that's staggering to see that, and for a public to see 1,000% increase in a cost that we're just continuing to fund. Yeah, just from a public perspective, I wonder how does that really look?
Sure, and if I can just address it, I think this is one of the things we've hit on a lot. It's just that the way of project development in the 90s and early 2000s was a completely different approach to what we're taking now. The approach now is when you select a project, the project will be fully funded, so it can be implemented. And the approach previously was really, you get some money and you just keep chasing money. And so obviously, as chasing money stretched out, project costs changed. I mean, there's a reason that the state has moved away as a whole from that previous approach. And I think that's unfortunately reflected in a handful of these legacy projects. But as we've done in the past few rounds, we've been trying to knock out those legacy projects and get them off our books, because if you look at the projects that we've been selecting more recently, the numbers aren't quite so drastic. And it's because we are trying to move them forward within a handful of years rather than pushing them out for decades.
Right. And I appreciate that. But will this be the last request for this kind of an increase for this project, for these projects that are 100, 1,000, more than 1,000, 212% increases? Are we going to see these projects back here again for additional funding, or is this a guarantee? Is this the final ask?
Well, I don't think the guidelines state that this would be necessarily be the final ask, but again, it's up to this group and then ultimately the policy board to approve any of these increases. So, the fact that somebody is requesting the funds doesn't guarantee that they're going to receive those dollars.
Okay.
But I hear you, Amy, and yes, and this, if I just might, make a comment or two, costs are relative, and cost increases are relative, and it's really hard to look at this without really diving deep into each one of these projects to understand exactly what is going on. They all have their own unique histories. Are these costs, inflationary things? Did we just do a bad job of estimating? Quite frankly, that is the most challenging thing. And we saw this with CVTA list that we went through yesterday, that it is really difficult to come up with reliable estimates when you have virtually no engineering information to begin with. And particularly right away is just, who knows? I mean, I can give many examples where we, estimated X and it ended up being 15 times X because it went to condemnation and so forth. Nobody can estimate those types of things. It's really frustrating, and time adds to that for sure. So, are we talking about mismanagement, or are we talking about things that we just can't see and know at this time that are having an effect and other things? So I hear you. It doesn't look great from an optics standpoint, but
right.
I feel like we're still doing a good job. It's just, we may not, we don't have the crystal ball to know what the costs are.
Agreed. Okay. And just to clarify, Miles, and thank you for that, Joe. I do understand. I mean, these projects are legacy projects, but I do think it's worth discussing, especially from the public's perspective. So Miles, we'll see the full list, and then from that, you're basically asking us to go ahead and approve funding for these out of the RSTPG funding pot. And then whatever's left over would be allocated to new projects. But I guess I just want to be clear about that.
Yes, you're right. So basically, this would come from the same pot as any new projects. And any funding that would be left over would then be available to select new projects. The policy that's in place has always been to prioritize existing project needs. The question is ultimately what comes up to the TAC is which needs are the ones that need to be met now and at what level. So I think that's the heart of the discussion that we're trying to get at. But yes, this would be built in, and then this would reduce whatever's available for the new projects that have been requested funding.
And can you remind me one more time what the overall amount we had available to allocate?
So the estimate in the fall, all right, so from last spring was 47 million across the 3 funding programs. Based on what we saw with the CVTA updated projections, we're expecting there will be something of a drop, but we haven't gotten updated numbers yet.
Okay, thank you.
Dorona, you've been waiting patiently. You're on mute, Dorona. Okay, maybe you're having some difficulties, but chime in if you can.
Okay.
All right. Oh, okay. You there?
I'm on my phone. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just have a couple questions. So it looked like for the existing projects with the request, were there 9 or 10 of those miles
Yes, I think there were 9.
when you were okay, and then with the prioritization that you presented, that is that was what, 8?
So staff hasn't made any recommendation on this, and I think that's where we're leaving it up to TAC to ultimately make the call on this. But this is the priorities based on phasing. So what's on the screen now would be based on project phases and what's coming up for the next phase in the project. So starting with construction as the most important, then moving on to the right of way, and then projects that are in future years.
I got it. And so does that mean that we go through those per the guidelines as far as the available funds? For this cycle, you would recommend, well, I'm sorry, we have the choice to pick through up to 9, all of them, with it, and we're going to say, do we agree with the dollar amounts for each of those? And that's going to equal to a total dollar amount. What's that going to leave for new projects?
So I believe this is 20, I haven't looked at it recently, but it's 20 something million out of the pot. So you're going to be reducing the pot by about half if we were to fund all of the requests at the full levels.
Okay, that's good to know. And then just, I mean, I think that will help us because we still have to go through each of these, right? But I think that will help us in that fact. And then lastly, I think maybe it's worth bringing up to the policy board how we utilize percent increase. I think it's a measure that is making the process look flawed or uninformed, and it may not just be the best measure for the board to utilize in the funding decision making, because it kind of offsets the first guidelines that we're going to fund existing projects first. And then so why does it matter, or does it matter that these percentages are this when you do have these legacy type projects that were under a different funding process of it took 20, 30 years to get funding for a project. And of course, thanks to new funding opportunities, we're trying to leverage and reduce that. So again, I just think that that's worth just bringing up. Is that really something that we need to show every time? Or if it's just some statement, I'm not sure, but I do understand the perception that it does have. But again, I think it's, what does it say with the guidelines? It say we will fund these existing projects. So that's all I have to add to it. But yeah, I would love to hear others, if you would, Mr. Chair, in either going through each of them, or if we're okay with the request. But I think, you know, that's where we probably are right now.
Okay. Thank you for those comments. I agree with much of what you said. Before we do that, I do have, if you could just clarify a couple things for me, Miles. The percentage is that relative, the percentage increase, is that relative to the very first estimate compared to the current estimate? Is that where that percentage is coming from?
So that's calculated on either the first year where the project was selected, whatever the total cost estimate was when the MPO first put money on it. So in like Sadler, for example, we're basing it off of the 2012 year. And then for other projects, it's wherever we had a full estimate available. So like the 3 Chopped, it's off of 2007, where we had all 3 phases in the estimates, or when we were able to put it together and actually compile a full estimate. I agree, it's not the same as like actually scoped and baselined. And I think that's part of the challenge. But as far as the board is aware, when we pick a project, that's what the number is. And so that's where we've baselined it, was when we picked the project, what was the number that we started with and where did we wind up? And the reason we've kept this format was really the policy board asked us to. They liked the table, they liked being able to see the history of the projects. So that's why we've continued with this. But I think we're open to revising it as needed to give a better, or perhaps more nuanced approach to it. We did go through that full exercise where we had an explanation for every project of how we got from the selection estimate to where we were today. So that was, I think, last January we went through that, and everybody provided all the background and the details. So the policy board has that. We can provide that again with each of the projects to provide a little bit more of that complete, more robust picture of how we got to where we are. But ultimately, that's what we're starting with for the baseline.
And just one more comment, and then I see a number of hands raised. Just to clarify, the 10% threshold at which TAC can approve and doesn't require TPO, is that 10% of the, what does that 10% represent? Okay. What number are we looking at? And is that per application cycle, or is it cumulative over the life of the project? You could explain that for me, please.
Sure. So that's one of the changes that we've made as part of the last few years of updates, is we moved to 10% cumulative. So from selection, you can get up to 10% more without going back to the policy board and just going through the TAC.
10% more of what? Sorry to interrupt.
Sure, from whatever the initial total estimate was whenever we allocated funding to the project. So that's the baseline that we're using for it. So it's not the scoped baseline, which is, I think, where, you know, if for like VDOT dashboard purposes, we'd be looking at, it's from this year of selection. Whenever the TPO first put money on it, what was the total that we were using at that time?
So it would be interesting, I think, to see, okay, what is that 10% threshold number? And then how much of that has been allocated, if any? Okay, so, you know, how much balance remains, if you will, if that were the preference. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I don't think we have that readily available. That would take a little bit of time from staff to calculate all that, but we should be able to go back and start pulling some of that information.
Okay. All right. I'll be quiet, and I want to turn it over to Austin and then Barb.
Yeah, thank you. One last question or point of clarification for myself on the 10%. It's 10% on what the TPO is already allocated to the project, not for the total cost, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So it would be, yeah. So if your cost goes up 30%, but you're only asking for the TPO to increase the share by 10%, then that's fine. If the TPO is just increasing within the 10%, we're okay. But if you're asking for more than that and the cost has gone up more than that, then we have to go back to the policy board every time.
Gotcha. Okay. And then 2 other thoughts. The Route 60 shared use path, the slide says it only increased 4%, and I understand the narrative with it then becoming a combined project looks like in 2020. I think it might be slightly misleading, although you did a good job explaining it, just the slide itself with how it looks with the rest of the projects, because you can see from 2019 to 2020, it's a 1.2 to a $5.5 million difference there. So I would just anticipate maybe some questions about that. But then overall, I mean, Goochland supports the sentiment. While it's not ideal that the legacy projects, we do kind of have to weed out, so to speak, and fund them and kind of move on. And hopefully we can correct some of these issues moving forward. But we do recognize that the priorities have to be given to, for the most part, to existing projects.
Barbie, you're next.
Yeah, I ditto to what Austin just said. But I do agree that, maybe another bullet with just a little more explanation, just a brief explanation for some of these really larger percentage increases would be good, because without that conversation, people walk away just thinking, oh my gosh, 1,000% increase, but there's a story behind that. And so it is important to point that out. And it's also good because it gives us a chance to explain sort of how the process works and some of the challenges that we're faced, just like Joe was explaining. Trying to predict the cost for right-of-way and even utilities is very, very difficult initially with the project. So I'm looking at my notes, just making sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah. My desire would be to fund all of these requests, including Pole Green. And I can make that motion.
Okay, we do have a motion. Sharon does have her hand up.
I second the motion while it's on the floor.
Okay, so now we're open for discussion. Sharon, did you have a?
Yep, I support those motion and second. No discussion.
Okay. Anybody else care to comment before we call for the vote? Okay, so let's, the motion is to fund all of the requests at the requested levels. Okay, some of those would fall into the 10% category, and so they would not need to be forwarded to the board for approval. Others will go to the board. Before I call for that, Miles, my intent with submitting was to stay in that 10% threshold, so I would like to assure that I've done that. I may not have done the math correctly. That's my concern. And I would also like to have the liberty to increase that to the 10% threshold if I had estimated that.
Yeah, I think Joe, on one of the projects it was like $100 off or something like that. So we can adjust that to make that right at the 10%.
Ditto.
Yeah, is everybody okay with that? Again, I don't think, again, hopefully the math is not going to be too far off. The requests, relatively speaking, are not, not big dollars. They're in the 1 million-ish range. Okay, so don't look for this to then change to 3 million. That's not what I'm trying to do here, but I do want to try to get the max. Okay, all right. I give you my word. We'll come back if there's some significant change there, but I don't think there will be. Okay. Anybody have anything else? Let's do this by roll call. Janice, please. You call roll.
Sure.
I mean, voice. You know what I'm saying.
Miss Amos,
Aye.
Miss Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goyne,
Aye.
Chair Dunez,
Aye.
Miss Smidler,
Aye.
Miss Inman,
Aye.
Miss Clark,
Aye.
Miss Dubinsky,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson,
This is Corey Robinson from GRCC. I'll say aye.
okay, thank you. Mr. Bushing,
Aye.
Ms. Rhodes,
Aye.
and Mr. O'Keefe.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you, everybody. I know that was tough. Miles, get us through the next item, please.
So this is the last one for today. So this is hopefully the easiest one. It's a TIP amendment for the Richmond-Henrico Turnpike South segment. This is basically an update to the total cost of an existing project that's already in the TIP, and then there's some slight adjustments to the phases, moving between years. Just because of the scale of the cost increase, we have to go through the amendment process rather than an administrative adjustment. So the project, just an overview, it's widening from 2 lanes to 4 lane divided, raised median, shared use paths, and sidewalks. The extents are from Laburnum Avenue to Hummingbird. This project's in our long range plan. It's considered regionally significant. It's already included in our conformity analysis. And as I mentioned, the amendment is being triggered due to the cost increase. Here's a quick sketch from, I think, the original Smart Scale application, just showing the project limits. The main thing on this is that we are increasing the total cost to $38 million. It was at 29, I believe. So this is the significant jump, which is why it's triggering that amendment process. The other big change is that we have moved the construction phase from 24 to 25 and added additional AC, so undetermined money on that side that potentially could become federal obligations down the road. So that's really the extent of the change. It's really just reflecting updated estimates and the need for that updated estimate to be reflected in the TIP. So the request from TAC today is that TAC should recommend approval of the proposed TIP amendment as requested by VDOT. Just for your information, since this is an existing project and this is really just a cost change, this would otherwise go onto the consent agenda for the policy board. So that's been our approach, is that where it's an existing project and it's just sort of the administrative process of project development, those go onto a consent agenda and only new projects go before them for a full review. So just wanted to let everyone know that, because that is something we've been doing for a few months now, and just wanted to make sure TAC was aware of that. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay. Austin, please.
I was just going to ask again real quick. What was that cost estimate increase?
I believe it was 29 originally, and it's up to 38.4.
All right, thank you.
And this is Sharon. We're working on trying to get the cost estimate down, but we're trying to look at betterment costs with our utilities to lower that cost. But right now we're not asking, it's just the cost estimate went up, so we have to update the TIP. We're not asking for any additional funding at this point.
Okay, so we need a motion and a second, please.
Sharon Smidler, I make a motion, the TAC recommend approval of this proposed TIP amendment as requested by VDOT.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? I think we can do this by voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Are there any
Aye.
opposition or abstentions? Okay, great. Okay, excellent. Thank you again, Miles. Fantastic job as always. Really fantastic. Next item is transportation updates, agency updates, beginning with DRPT. Tiffany.
Good morning. Yeah, I'll make this as brief as possible. So we are currently accepting our grant applications for FY25. Also still navigating some of the technical issues we may be experiencing with launching web grants, our new online grants management system. For those of you who are used to applying for our grants and are experiencing any kind of difficulties, we are hosting office hours Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday through the end of this month. And so my agency update, as well as on the DRPT website, we do have a link to the team's meeting information. So you can feel free to join us around your lunch hour around 12 to 1. The only other thing is that I think it kind of got lost last month, but Commonwealth Transportation Board did approve 15 transit projects from our Transit Ridership Incentive Program. So we had a mid-cycle application period that also introduced 2 different types of projects that we could submit or programs. So that was passenger amenities and public safety. So I have included in our agency update the full list, but just of note that we did fund for GRTC bus stop improvements in Richmond and Chesterfield County. So we look forward to seeing those projects be implemented. And with that, that's my agency update. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tiffany. I believe we have Corey Robinson here from GRTC to give the GRTC update.
Yep, that is correct. So I'll try to make mine as brief as possible as well. So December was a month of preparation and anticipation as GRTC enters the new year with expansion on the mind. Signs are in the ground and promotional materials are being distributed to celebrate the extension of the 1A, which begins serving 8 new miles along Midlothian Turnpike, and that is going to be in effect starting this Sunday. Dates were also identified for March for the launch of the 3 additional zones of the Link Microtransit, which will soon be serving communities in Chesterfield, Ashland, and Powhatan. The existing Azalea zone continues to improve, with Link carrying nearly 200 passengers last week. And numbers are expected to rise with the phase out of the limited service of the Route 93 with the upcoming January booking. Earlier this month, GRTC hosted the first pre-bid meeting for contractors interested in the Pulse Station modification project, which remains on track for construction later this year. And on January 25th, GRTC and our consulting team will be hosting our first public meeting in the permanent downtown transfer hub study. That will be at 5:30 p.m. at the main library. GRTC will also be hosting a launch event and ceremonial ride-along for the 1A, and that will be on Tuesday, January 16th at 10 a.m., where we look forward to celebrating this huge step in advancing regional transit connectivity. And that is all I have for everyone today.
Great. Appreciate the update. John, what's going on with Ride Finders?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I'll make mine brief as well. Ride Finders just started a new Kickstart Your Carpool pilot program that we just started in January. So we're in the process of reaching out and meeting with employers and talking with employers and employees about this new pilot program. We're meeting with Foursquare ITP on the Ride Finders, CAP strategic plan, continuing to meet with them on that. I know, as I've reported previous other times, we continue to see van pools increase. We did have a new van pool start to 15 passenger from Newport News to the Defense General Supply Center over in Richmond and Chesterfield. So we're continuing to see those move up. And we also provided Chesterfield County with a number of van pools that originate and depart from Chesterfield, along with van sizes and locations per request from their board member. And that'll be the end of my report, and I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody may have. Just wanted to try and keep it brief.
Okay. Thank you, John. Anybody have any questions for John? Okay, we'll finish up. Sarah, what else is happening at VDOT?
Okay, so just to reiterate, Smart Scale Round 6 will kick off March 1st. Major focus in pre-application development on VTrans needs, readiness, and HPP eligibility. Please consider using the pre-scoping module so we can support you all in readiness review. This kind of got lost in the shuffle, but the RRTPO has completed estimate reviews of the, or excuse me, the VDOT has completed estimate reviews of the RRTPO funding applications that you all submitted this fall. We'll be doing an internal review this week and hopefully going over them with Miles. So you'll see our estimate reviews hopefully next week. Fall Line Trail DB2 is, I think, has selected a final alignment for DB2, which is very, very exciting. So, and DB1 is moving along swimmingly. So that's great news. I-64, the segment C, which is the, I guess, the Hampton Road segment, is the RFP has been released and it's scheduled for CTB selection April 2024. In other sort of I-64 related news, and Amy, you can help me with this. New Kent County has requested and made an effort to have the portion of New Kent I-64 within the New Kent boundaries commemorated for Miss Page, who we lost in late 2023. That is on the CTB agenda for next week for action. So just wanted to make you all aware that that is an action item next week and something we are very grateful for New Kent's efforts on. So thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Sarah. And I will just say thanks to everyone for your support of that. I know we've received letters from different localities in support of that, as well as Plan RVA and CBTA. So just want to thank everybody for that support.
And that's it from me, Joe. So thank you.
Thank you again, Sarah. I'll refer everybody to page 52 of the agenda package, which has future meeting topics listed there. Do we have any members like to share anything for the good of the group?
Oh, sure, Mr. Chair. I just think it's important to thank Miles for all of his work. I mean, yesterday through the CBTA meeting and keeping everything on track with that, and with everything that he's helping to keep everything on track with the TPO. I just want to really acknowledge his great work and thank you, Miles, for keeping everything on track moving forward.
I
Thanks,
agree
Amy.
1000%.
Yeah.
Okay, so next meeting, I believe, is February 6th. Is that correct? February 6th. There's a typo in the agenda, but I believe it's February 6th. And with that, we are now adjourned.
Thank you. Have a good day.
See you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
February 13th, but
Happy
I may be wrong.
Okay, February 13th. Okay.